Hi everybody and welcome to IRB Training Video 3.2, the IRB Application, the 8th video in our series designed to introduce students, faculty, and staff to the IRB processes on Georgia Southern University's campuses. The purpose of this video is to help you to understand the IRB applications as well as the IRB review process. There are two primary forms that can be completed to undergo IRB review. The first is the exempt form, and the second is the expedited and the full board form. Although expedited and full board categories of review are separate, they utilize the same form. Let's take a closer look at these forms on the Office of Research Integrity's website. When a researcher navigates to the Office of Research Integrity website and hovers over the IRB tab, they can find access to all the IRB forms. These forms are also located on the right side of the page. Let's imagine that a researcher would like to submit for exempt review. Once a researcher clicks on the exempt review link, they can find access to the categories of exemptions that we've discussed in previous videos. For example, exemption category 1 is for research that's conducted in established or commonly accepted educational settings. Once a researcher has determined that they qualify for the exemption, all of the required forms can be found at the bottom of the page. Let's imagine that a researcher would like to submit for expedited review. Once a researcher clicks on the Expedited Review tab and then goes to Forms, they can find access to all the forms that are required to submit for Expedited Review. Please note that the IRB application for Expedited Review is the same for Full Board Review. The first page of the IRB application is the cover page where the researcher provides information about themselves, the co-investigators, and any sources of funding. After this is the application for research approval. Let's take a closer look at some of the subsections of the research approval form. The first is the personnel section. Here the researcher should provide any information about personnel involved with the study who will have access to the study data. After this is the purpose section. Here the researcher should be able to clearly articulate the purpose of the study that's free of technical jargon. Also, please note that researchers should pay very close attention to the guiding questions in the subsections of these forms. For example, within the purpose section, the researcher is required to provide a brief description of how this study will fit into the current literature. However, the focus should be on how the research procedures have been used before, and the focus should be on studies that have utilized similar methodologies. After this is the outcomes section. Here the researchers will clearly articulate the results that they expect to achieve, as well as any anticipated benefits. Benefits can come to participants, but they can also be broad benefits that are related to society in general. After this is the subject sections. Here the research should be clear to provide the maximum number of participants who will participate in the project, as well as describe the study population. The researcher should be very clear about the inclusion or exclusion requirements. Inclusion or exclusion requirements are the factors that dictate whether or not a subject will be allowed to participate in the study. The researcher should also be clear about how long each subject will be involved in the study, including the number of occasions and the duration. After this, the researcher should provide information about recruitment and incentives. If the researcher plans to recruit subjects using emails, flyers, social media posts, or anything like that, they should provide copies of those materials for review. Also, the researcher should be very clear about any incentives that are utilized, including the use of money, course credit, extra credit, or gift cards. Researchers should note that recruitment materials and incentives should not be overly coercive. After this, the researcher should provide a detailed explanation about the procedures and the timeline for the study. Here the researcher should be very clear in a step-by-step fashion how the subjects will be recruited and how the data will be collected. They also need to provide information about how informed consent will be obtained. Please know that researchers can find sample informed consent documents on the ORI website. After this, the researcher should focus on how the data will be analyzed. The data analysis section should not only include information about how the data will be analyzed, but also how it will be stored, maintained, and destroyed after the study is complete. After this, the researcher needs to provide information about risk. The researcher should explore any possible risks that are associated with the study. Even things such as minor discomfort and answering questions on a survey need to be considered. The researcher also needs to provide information about whether or not there is greater than minimal risk involved with the study. Please note that minimal risk is defined as the amount of risk that a person may typically encounter on a day-to-day basis. The researcher also needs to provide information about the steps that are taken to minimize risks, as well as some explanation about how the risks are reasonable in relationship to the anticipated benefits. The researcher cannot simply state that no risk exists. There is risk involved with all research. After this, there are sections for the researcher to provide information about research involving minors, or research that involves deception, or research that involves medical procedures. In the event that a researcher would like to conduct a study that involves deception or medical procedures, it's a good idea to contact the IRB before completing the application. The review processes for exempt, expedited, and full board review are all different because they require different numbers of IRB members to review. The exempt process is pretty quick and it lasts about 1 to 2 weeks because it only requires one administrator or one IRB reviewer to review. The expedited review process requires about 2 to 4 weeks to complete, and it is typically reviewed by 2 IRB members. IRB members have 5 days to respond to the review request. The full board review typically requires about 4 to 6 weeks to complete because it requires a full panel of IRB members to examine the application. Please note that the review times are contingent upon the type and the quality of the application and the number of revisions required. The review process is typically faster when an application is completed properly the first time it is submitted. It is also a good idea for researchers to respond quickly to review requests. Just to review a few rules of thumb, typically it takes about a week for an exempt review, several weeks for an expedited review, and a month or more for full board review. I hope this helps you to understand the various aspects of the IRB application as well as the review process.